Hello, my name is Leonard Moss. I live in Morristown, New Jersey. Right now I'm in Boca Raton visiting my parents, Gisela and Emmanuel Moss. I always felt growing up in New York that I was able to tell who had a similar background to me, people that had parents that grew up in Europe and survived the Holocaust. And I had a good track record. When I would meet somebody, I would be able to hit it right, on the nose. There was something similar about them and myself. And this went on for quite a long time into, from my teenage years until I was in my 20s, I would say. And then once I left New York, I didn't really come into contact with so many people. But I'm bringing this up because I think that the Holocaust has affected me. It's affected the way I've grown up. It maybe shaped my entire life. The way my parents brought me up, I don't think that they were necessarily doom and gloom or brought it up or discussed it amongst us in a depressing manner. Really, it probably did not come up all that often, but I think that they were driven to succeed. I think that they impressed upon my sister and myself that we should succeed. They'll deny that they pushed us to do any particular career, but somehow I think that maybe there was some pressure to go into some sort of a profession. I'm a fighter, and maybe because of their survival skills, I feel that I can survive because I will never go through what they've gone through. So the minor ups and downs that one has in life are nothing compared to what they did. Although at the time, when you're going through them, they seem like they're the biggest problems in the world and nobody ever faced them. But, you keep plugging along, and I like to use the word persevere because I think that's how I became successful. I persevered because it wasn't always easy for me to achieve what I've achieved. So I think that they had to persevere, and maybe I inherited the genes of two survivors, and God willing, that's going to make me a stronger person from the past and also into my future. So I always have to remember that. I don't think that the Holocaust broke their faith or belief in God. I think that they have very strong beliefs in their faith and in their culture. Judaism was a big part of our lives growing up. We went to school, not to school, we went we went to religious school. I even went to yeshiva for a little bit early on. We went to shul, is what I meant to say. Every weekend, my mother volunteered there to make the kiddush for the junior congregation. We would walk there every single Shabbos. I went to many Jewish events. They called them Shabbatones, where we would celebrate the Sabbath overnight and really observe. And in the temple that we grew up in, our shul was a conservative synagogue, which really kept the rules just like any Orthodox synagogue, other than separating men and from women. But the service was exactly the same. You weren't allowed to bring your car. On the high holidays, they would actually lock the parking lot so people couldn't drive. And we kept a kosher home. Shabbos candles were lit every Friday night. But the nature of my father's work, where he had to work on Saturdays and Friday nights, he was in a retail business, and it required him to be open. And it wasn't like such a big, successful business where he had, multiple employees that they could have maybe done this for him and he could have been off for Shabbos. He had to be there, and it just required, it was basically a one-man operation. But believe me, if he could have, he would have taken off for the Sabbath, because I'm sure he would have loved to observe. And he has many religious first cousins that did continue to live that way, but it wasn't something that he did. Whether it was a conscious choice or it was a necessity from work, I'm not really sure. His sister and his brother-in-law, his sister Sarah, who lived in Brooklyn for a while, I mentioned her earlier, they grew up, obviously the same household as children. They had different experiences. They were separated during the Holocaust, and when they came back here, she managed to keep a more religious life for herself and her family, more so than my father. Her son went to yeshiva all the way through, and he practices as a modern Orthodox Jew. I think along the way, things loosened up. Bringing Chinese food into the house, but with separate dishes, for example, that could have been the first step. I remember the first time, we ever tasted shrimp. And, so things loosened up over the years. It's very important that my family carries on our traditions. I often felt that my whole life, as I mentioned before, was shaped maybe by the Holocaust or being Jewish. I feel the world looks at me differently because of who I am. I think I'm always going to be looked at as a Jew. And every day I probably present myself as a Jew, and maybe that's why I'm looked at as a Jew. But that's who I am. That's that. I can't change that. I'm not going to pretend to be somebody else. And I don't care what my kids say or what anybody says, the world will always look at me as a Jew. And if God forbid something happens again, similar to what happened to my parents' generation, well, guess what? They're going to look at me as a Jew. So I have to remember that. I'm always a Jew. If I'm always a Jew, I might as well act like a Jew, and I might as well have my children act like a Jew. And if they think that they're going to be able to survive in society and forget who they are, I think they're wrong, and they're going to be sorry one day. And I've always instilled in my children to remember who they are. I tell Rachel, who's my eldest, who's in college, go to Hillel. Make sure you go to Hillel. Find some Jewish friends. You could call it being prejudiced against other people. I don't think that that's what it is. And I'm afraid that people will think that when they listen to this. I don't think that that's what it is. But because we're always going to be looked at that way, you have to know who your people are and make friends with your own, because those people, God willing, will stand by you. Sometimes I worry that everyone else will not. What I see that is nice compared to when I grew up is that people used to, I think, separate more. There were blacks, there were Italians, there were Jews, there were Greeks. We grew up in a very diverse area. And I see that there was maybe more prejudice when I was growing up than what I feel now. I think my children, thank God, grew up in a better world, and maybe they're in a better place in society than I felt I was. Maybe they don't have the same feelings because they grew up in a different era. I think people are very much more accepting of one another, and didn't grow up with these barriers that seem to have been around, whether it was based on race, religion, or ethnicity. It seems like that was more prevalent in my generation than what I see in my children's generation. Well, that's all well and good. And maybe that'll make life easier for them. It also makes it easier for them maybe to assimilate into society. And maybe for them to marry non-Jews. But remember, they're still Jews. That's what they need to remember. And you know something? I'm not always right. But I have a feeling I'm going to be right on this. And I hope they don't learn the hard way.